Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today for the April 19th, 2023 Design Review Board. Will the board and the ex officio members please introduce themselves? Starting with Cameron, please.
Cameron Bolin, AI representative.
Mike Reynolds, Planning Office.
Matthew DeBard-Laban, Downtown Knoxville Alliance.
John Thurman, Downtown Development.
Perry Childress, Community Design Center.
Rick Blackburn, Historic Zoning Commission.
Josh Wright, Urban Design Representative.
Lindsay Crockett, Knox Planning.
Joanna Tour, Business Development Representative.
Suzanne Taravella, Resident Representative.
Jared Worsham, Downtown Resident.
Laura Cole, Downtown Resident Representative.
Dory Karen, Knox Planning.
Christina McGrawn, City Law Department.
Peter Ahrens, Plans Review and Inspections Director.
Thank you for that. And thanks for coming, everyone. The minutes from last month's March 15th meeting have been distributed. Has everyone had a chance to review them, and does anyone have any comments?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now, I believe we wanted to talk about swapping the schedule around a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was, is that where we are? Are we at the applications? Selfishly, I need to leave at 5, and so looking at the agenda, it seems like there'll be a lot of discussion around 115 East Jackson, or could potentially be some discussion. I would make a motion that we take these out of order and move that to the first in the agenda.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Now, Lindsay, do we have any applications for the staff?
Yes, there were 4 administrative approvals issued since the last meeting. The first one is a subdivision plat at 3205 Johnston Street. This is in the infill housing overlay. It created 2 lots with existing houses on them. You can see the plat on your screen. The second one was a small secondary structure, an accessory structure in the infill housing overlay. The placement meets the design guidelines for the infill housing overlay, and the building contains design elements which are compatible with the primary house. The third one was another subdivision plat that corrected differences between the tax parcel and the lot of record. This is a larger sized lot. It doesn't involve infill construction at this time. And then the fourth one was a new sign, a non-illuminated projecting sign at 220 West Jackson Avenue. This is an aluminum sign. It's replacing an existing sign of the same shape using the existing sign arm, and it's shown there on your screen. And that's it.
Thank you for that. And with that, we can move into the board approvals. Lindsay, would you start us out with 115 East Jackson Avenue, 4 Bravo 23 DT.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to run through this. I know the applicant has a whole presentation as well, which has been provided in the packets, is on the case file online, but I've reduced the images that y'all are going to see on the screen just for conciseness and what we're looking at here. So this is a new construction building. It's on an approximately 64-foot wide by 16-foot long, that might not be accurate, site on the north side of Jackson Avenue. This site is only recently a vacant lot. It's an existing historic building was demolished in March and April 2023 to accommodate this structure. The site is within the Southern Terminal and Warehouse Historic District. So the proposed building is a wood frame on concrete podium structure. It is 6 stories tall with an additional level of a roof deck. There is a parking deck that's located in the rear, so you can see the site plan here on your screen. The building is proposed to be clad in a concrete skin. These are concrete fiber facade panels. There are a variety of manufacturers and potential options that are listed in your overall agenda packet. These will be intended to imitate stone cladding, and there are panels of varying depths on the east, the right side elevation. And then I'll show you this on the rendering. You can see those panels of varying depth on that east side elevation. Their primary windows on the 2nd through 5th stories are proposed to be aluminum or fiberglass, rectangular 6-light windows. Going back to the facade, this building is accessible via 3 pedestrian entries fronting Jackson Avenue. You can see one here, a second, and a third, and then 1 automobile entry on that leftmost bay of the facade. That access will be 17 feet wide, and it'll extend to the rear of the building where that parking deck is located on the rear. So you can see the access there and going to the parking. That parking deck is on the rear adjacent to the railroad. So the facade, it's 5 bays overall in length. The ground level has this gated entry to the parking deck. There's a revolving door and a second pedestrian door within storefront windows, and then 2 additional bays of storefront windows and a third entry there. The first 3 bays feature the upper level. It's cantilevered over the recessed storefront, and then this 4th bay is recessed back on the 3rd through 5th stories. It has recessed balconies as well, which you can see. That 6th story up here, that's recessed from the overall roof line, and I'll show you these in the renderings, makes it a little more clear. It's recessed from the overall facade line. And there are full-length storefront windows and doors and an elevator shaft with that sloped roof on the right side. And then the rooftop deck features a prominent sloping roof on top of that building. You can see on the east elevation here, those concrete fiber panels of varying depths. The rear elevation has 4 levels of windows that reflect the facade patterns. And you can see the rooftop deck here enclosed by, there are metal equipment screens, also glass guardrails, and a metal privacy screen. There are additional design features incorporated, including these row of lighting underneath the cantilevered section, and mechanical equipment is going to be located on the rear roof lines of the building. That's called out specifically in your application package. So I'll just run through some of the comments and then we can discuss as needed. So this property occupies a newly vacated lot in the Southern Terminal and Warehouse Historic District. There's a specific definition for the Warehouse District in the design guidelines. That's in comment number 1 in the staff report. It's generally described as being composed of masonry buildings ranging in height from 1 to 5 stories. It has a physical manifestation of the warehousing character that developed in this section of Knoxville. The historic resources section of the design guidelines does apply, and the applicant has addressed the variety of those throughout the application packet. In terms of placement of the building, the guidelines recommend maintaining the setback of adjacent historic buildings. This building is largely aligned with the adjacent buildings. You can see in the site plan here the 2 existing buildings as well. It also spans the entire width of the property, which is appropriate for that historic context. Overall, the placement on the lot meets the design guidelines. In terms of the parking access, this entry to the parking deck will create a new curb cut and an automobile crossing point over a sidewalk that has a high amount of pedestrian traffic. And as we know, the design guidelines for downtown encourage the pedestrians first and the automobiles kind of last in downtown development. Obviously, the site doesn't have alley access as an option, but the applicant should provide details on how automobiles and pedestrians walking along Jackson will safely interact. This adjacent building at 111 Jackson Avenue projects further to the sidewalk, so there are additional site distance challenges. The driveway that's proposed in this site plan per city engineering is too narrow, and it's too close to the adjacent property line at the right-of-way. So those are some site plan elements that will need to be rectified. This building, again, it's 6 stories with an upper level deck. It will occupy the site of a demolished 1-story building. The adjacent structures are 2 and 3 stories tall, and the guidelines recommend that the height of lower stories should be similar to the adjacent historic buildings. It is significantly taller than the surrounding historic district, which again, the guidelines say it's characterized by 1 to 5-story buildings. The board should discuss this proposed height in relation to the surrounding context. This prominent roof line on the roof deck, I'll pull up the renderings here, also sort of adds to that visual impact of the building. It's disproportionately tall related to the building's scale, and it doesn't relate to the historic context. In the opinion of staff with relation to the design guidelines, this element should be revised. The guidelines also focus heavily on the pedestrian experience at ground level, so that's looking at this level right here. It does have a pedestrian scaled environment comparable to adjacent buildings. There's a transparent rhythm of entrances and windows, and it has recessed and multiple entries per the design guidelines. Storefronts are also recommended to complement the openness, bulkheads, and transoms of historic buildings. These storefronts use full glass, so they're almost entirely open, using full transparency instead of any of those traditional forms. Overall, this proposal avoids blank walls along all street-facing elevations. It has a great deal of transparency, which you can see on the front, the side, and the rear elevations. The proportion of these windows are comparable to nearby historic windows. In terms of the window form, the guidelines also emphasize maintaining window width, height, and spacing compatible with the context. Typically, historic buildings in the warehouse district have multi-late steel industrial or aluminum windows with individual panes, and these muntins and rails that are pretty substantial and visually defined. There's not a specific window material included in the application. The renderings show the windows as pretty much flush with the overall building elevations, though historic examples have a lot more depth. So the applicant should submit specific window details for the material selected, including a section to illustrate complexity and detail compatible with the district. The window is proposed to be clad in a concrete skin, so you can see that here. It's concrete fiber panels intended to imitate stone. So the board should discuss this material in a district characterized predominantly by brick masonry structures. The applicant should provide material samples for these siding materials to confirm that they can appropriately reflect the detail of stone and not thin contemporary fiber cement panels. There are some decorative elements that are recommended by the design guidelines. This one, the design does omit these decorative trim, brickwork, or ornament that's recommended in the historic resources section. So in terms of the staff recommendation, overall the board should begin with discussing the proposed building's overall height and scale in relation to the context. Pending board discussion and approval of the building's height and scale, staff would recommend the additional details return to the board for further review. So the final site plan shown to meet engineering standards for access and parking with additional details on the pedestrian safety at that sidewalk crossing. A revised roof line on the rooftop deck, reduced in height and visual impact to be compatible with the context, material samples for all proposed siding materials, specific window details including material specs and a section with depth and detail to be comparable to the district, and then any signage to be installed at the building, but that is an element that could be submitted at a later date as needed.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. Is the applicant here and would they like to speak?
I would love to speak.
Thank you. Please just state your name and address.
Yes. Logan Higgins, 133 South Gay Street, and I'll go ahead and...
Brian Ewers, 111 East Jackson.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we could go through step-by-step presentation of this, but I think everyone wants to be out of here within the next few hours, so I will not do that. But what I would like to do is talk about the specific concerns that were brought up and address some of those, some of the things that are, I think, going to be our biggest talking points here today. So first and foremost, I want to say I have in my notes, in all caps, the windows will not be flush with the facade. That is an error in the rendering that makes it look like that. We are very strong in our opinion and plan to prevent that from being the case. So we will be bringing out the facade material and insetting the windows to avoid that. But so to address a couple of the concerns in relationship to the driveway and the other departments of the city, Lindsay's right. We do need to make adjustments to that access. We've worked on provisions to get the proper approval to do a curb cut that will go over onto the neighboring site, and then we also will need to widen the driveway a little bit, but we're able to do that by making our columns less deep, so they're going to be skinnier columns to get us to the required width that we will need to get back there. And then for the for the rooftop design, we've actually we had a meeting last week about this building overall with engineering and building and zoning, and the roof design actually puts us, with it bumping up like that, puts us into a category that we don't want to be in, and so we will actually need to bring that back down anyways. So I think that after today's approval, we can come back with a new design of the roof that shows it more flat up there. In regards to the materials, we do have some samples that we'll pass around here in a minute to give everybody an idea of what we're looking at there. But then in terms of the height and scale, which I think is one of the biggest concerns here, we got into this a little bit in our packet, comparing the way that downtown and not just Knoxville, but other downtowns develop over the years. And if you look back at Knoxville over the past 100+ years, you can see that a pattern of blocks having shorter buildings and then a taller building coming up and then another tall building, or sometimes not. You know, if you look at the 100 block of Gay Street, most of those buildings are 3 and 4 stories, and then you have Sturkey, which is 10 stories. And I don't think that any of us would say that Sturkey is, shouldn't be there, that building. And similar with the JFG building, I think it's a little taller than some of the surrounding buildings. And we could go on. We have included a lot of examples of that in our packet with the different 3D views of downtown. So I do think that in keeping with the overall guidelines, the spirit of the guidelines for downtown, maintaining the height and scale does not necessarily mean keeping the same height consistent with the adjacent buildings. I do think there's a lot of leeway for varying heights from building to building. To break up the scale, though, we did try to divide. If you look at this view right here, how we've tried to fit within the column grid, the building is divided into 20-foot spacing. And then with that, we've managed to break up this very long facade because most of the buildings are not this wide in the old city. So from a scale and massing standpoint, we've tried to create more visual interest on the front facade and prevent it from being just a flat flush with a street view. And then in regards to location, with the setbacks related to the street, we've brought one side up to be on the ground floor to be flush with the neighboring building, and then the main level we pushed back to be closer to where the building originally, the previous building was, and then the upper floors we've brought out as a cantilever to both give more square footage and also to act as a little bit of an awning for that part of the sidewalk and an entryway to the building. In regards to the parking and the pedestrian scale of things, I do think that it's not uncommon to see garage access similar to this. This, of course, isn't going to a garage; it's going to a surface lot. But in scale, I think it's very similar to what you would see in other parts of downtown and other historic districts. And then the idea to bring the building closer to the front and allow for the parking in the back is more thinking of how we can be fiscally responsible right now with the construction of this building and bring it up to the street rather than taking a 2-story building all the way across the footprint or something. It just doesn't work the same way, and I think that this gives better opportunity for future growth where the parking is now. And last thing I'll say is back to the conversation of, let me switch over to materials real quick. From a material standpoint, we did not think that it was fitting to try to use a brick here. There's the brick buildings that you see in the old city and downtown are 100 up to 100 years old, some older, and there's variety in those buildings. Or in those bricks. There's a lot of those are a handmade brick or just have different qualities that we're not able to get today. And so we didn't really feel it was appropriate to use brick here, but we did look at other buildings downtown, and we showed examples of that in our packet with some of the other stone facade buildings downtown. And so that's where we went into the study to see if we could do a stone-like application. What we ended up with were these materials that'll be passed around. And really, it's not fiber cement in like a hardy board type of application where it's layered composites with a veneer over it. These are through and through a concrete material, and so you can see by looking at the materials that the surface is really just a byproduct of the composition of the actual material. And you can see examples here that we included of stone facades and non-brick buildings next to red brick buildings, and this is pretty common in downtown Knoxville. So, and then, like I said, back to the scale, this is actually a great view of what I was talking about earlier, how you see, I mean, White Lily is very similar in height to this building. It's directly behind it, next to across the railroad tracks. And then if you look at some of these other taller buildings, JFG in this view, and then the Holston building there, you know, when those were built, they were the tallest buildings on their block. And I think that's just really the way downtowns grow. So I think that it is appropriate, and in regards to the adjacent buildings, the McWhorter building recently added a rooftop addition. You can't really, you all approved that, and you know you can't really tell that scale from the street, but the height of the McWhorter building is, I think, a good step to where our height is, and then we've also pulled it off the side to allow that top floor to read as smaller and more tucked away from the front facades. So with that, I think I've covered all the concern points, and I'll let Brian add comments, and then we'll stick around for questions. Thank you.
I really don't have much to add to that. The scale, like I said, we've looked at our neighborhood, what's down the street, and you know, as Logan mentioned, there is varying heights and steps, and again, it's you know, we were in front of you a while back trying to save that building, and it didn't work out. So we're coming back, all new construction, and as far as trying to, we looked at brick, but then we'd be spending a lot of time and effort trying to support brick, where it's not necessarily a load-bearing brick building anymore. So we're more modern, of course, and modern materials. This would be a rain screen. Again, the intent is that these panels are going to look more substantial than I think what you're used to seeing or have seen recently with a hardy panel and the windows being flush. I know exactly what your concern is or comment is on that. That's all I really would add to that discussion.
Well, I have just a couple of comments, and then
Wait,
I'll
hold on.
be quiet.
Just want to make sure there's nobody that needs to speak in opposition.
Oh.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Sorry. Didn't mean to get out of order, Mr. Chairman. But anyway, was primarily one, I always applaud y'all's presentations. Logan is always very thorough. And supporting that, I have no problem with it looking like a modern building. Although being a preservationist, I don't necessarily support false history, so trying to make it look like an old building is not really my intent on infill. I like this, one of your renderings that shows what's going to be built toward the stadium and how this end of Jackson is getting taller as you go away, and your other examples. I do, however, am a little concerned with the abruptness of this. And one of your earlier proposals had the tall portion set back somewhat. And my question was, in looking at your sections and things, did you all consider pushing the tower back one bay above the first two floors, such that that gave a step back in a more gentle transition from the lower scale Jackson as we're moving toward the increasingly tall buildings that are being built to the east? As far as materials and that part, I do agree with the comments about the roof deck and the weird flying thing, but I understand that made you taller and changed your category, and you don't want to do that now, so that one seems to be resolved. But my primary question and statement was about the option of pushing the tower back one bay to soften the impact of the scale change.
When you say tower, are you talking about the far right?
Everything from the second floor up. So that for one bay, it's a two-story building along Jackson, and then it steps back one bay and your higher stories go above that. And I was kind of enjoying the section included here to say, well, does that terribly disrupt their vertical circulation? And it does not seem to have that much impact on your vertical circulation and how much building you're eating with circulation that you don't want to do.
Just to clarify, when you say a bay, or so if you look at our top floor right there, is that what you mean, like bringing it back to that surface, or do you mean a further
You see
back
the
point?
see the stairwell
Yeah.
right there where the hand is. Everything above that, move it back one bay,
Pushing back, yeah.
so that your back wall is flush all the way up, and the front wall has the step rather than having the step on the back where the building steps in.
In the what?
Yeah, flip it front to back.
Mirror the front to the back, so the condition that's on the back is on the front. That lower piece on the back.
Yeah.
Oh, where the.
So that when you look down the street, it's a 2-floor facade, and then the rest of the tower and the usable space is back 20 feet.
I get what you're saying. So in thinking back on the process that we went through, that one-story portion in the back that you do see, that's the commercial kitchen for the restaurant space on the ground floor. In order to, like you mentioned, the vertical circulation is a big part of that, and we need to have an access going out the front and out the back. And so if we were to pull that back further, that would be pulling the staircase back into the restaurant or in the retail space further, and really disrupt the layout of that. And then the other thought in terms of because it doesn't make sense to necessarily flip the program of the ground floor. And so if we were to shift back the upper levels, then from a construction standpoint, we would be looking at some strange disruption where we would almost have cantilevered or large columns back there.
What I was suggesting would have really no impact on the first two floors, on their layout or the location of the stairwell. The stairwell would come up as it does in the second floor, and then pick up on the next bay and continue on up. Basically just taking it at the second floor and scooting that whole piece back. So it would have no impact on the layout of any floor except the transition of the stairwell.
Those 4 stories are pretty much stacked and identical residential units. So making that move would make that front, we're pretty tight as it is on the square footages of those units. So stepping that back would make those pretty much unusable.
Is the second floor residential as well?
Yes. And also from that's speaking about the practical side of things. Looking at the guidelines, I know there is mention of stepping back scale. And I will say that looking at I think that makes a lot of sense as you get really tall. But when we were looking at the precedents, like we mentioned, just in the old city, the Sturkey building and the JFG building and White Lily, all of those are right there up against the street. And so that it didn't really even cross our minds to step back higher floors because we didn't think we were quite in that height to justify that.
Well, your treatment of that top floor helps soften the height, and I appreciate that.
That one we did think to step back.
Yeah, so that's sort of, I was looking at that whole notion of the tower to the rear. But anyway, that was my only real comment about exploring different.
I don't know if it's very apparent on the presentation, but as far as the program of the building, that ground floor is planned for a restaurant, and then 4 stories of apartments or short-term rentals above that. And again, each floor plate is identical, and stacking those. And then the upper floor is going to be private residences.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Previously, when there was an existing building there, stepping it back made more sense. Like, because this is the old, and here's the new kind of set back.
Show, yes.
Personally, for me, the scale does not bother me, but that's just me. I did have a question about, this is more of a practical question about the windows that overlook the other buildings. Have you guys secured some sort of air rights to make sure that that's going to stay that way?
Yeah.
I have a comment and then a question. I think when we were looking at this project, when it was an existing building that you were adding on to, the height made a lot more impact. From a historic preservation and district standpoint, before we were significantly modifying the existing condition of the historic context. But I think in alignment with historic preservation guidelines, the buildings are supposed to be a record of their time. So if this size is economically feasible for this time, and the materials are economically feasible for this time, and the scale is appropriate within reason for the rest of the district, I think it's appropriate in general. My question is about the siding, the cladding. Is it rendered as white as a generic, we're going to figure that out later, or do you intend for it to be white?
Where did those
Samples make it into rendering? No, correct. The intention that it would be white or buff, yes. Yeah.
So my concern with that, and everybody here is probably going to roll their eyes, but white buildings get dirty over time and they accumulate mold and mildew, and it's a really high building that's difficult to clean. And it's not that far away from the train yard and the interstate, so I'm curious about patina and grime and just the general, how it's going to look in 10 years. So I'd like you to speak to that.
Yeah. So of this sample, this is what we have in mind. In the middle, it's a rougher material, a little bit closer to a stone finish, and it's an off-white, so kind of a gray color. Of course, it's a little bit more washed out in here in these views, but the idea with going with the white was to be in keeping with some of the other stone facade buildings downtown, and so that was our general idea. I think that you're right. There's going to have to be maintenance, cleaning, and whatnot, but that's what we've had in mind. There may be opportunities to go with a different shade, but I think that this one being kind of that closer to some of the buildings that we showed as examples is kind of is the direction we've been heading. So.
I have a few comments to kind of play off what Perry said. At least for me, I think this is less of a discussion about matching context exactly. I also agree with Suzanne that modern interpretations of our downtown are needed and it's of our time. And I think they're encouraged. And I've worked on projects that are more modern in downtown and I've appreciated that. But if we're solely looking at this project, let's say this was not even in its context, I think just as a design has some haphazardness and it's unresolved. I think the proposal is unresolved. So those are where I'll start. And I think that starting with it is the scale that we talked about, is the hat on the top. I appreciate that you showed the base middle top per the guidelines, but of course this is a base middle top. I think it's got a really big head on it, which you said you guys are working on bringing that back down because of, I guess you guys are over a high-rise status or something like that. 75. Also, but thinking in the respective context, where I have seen in downtown where we do have more modern examples, is thinking how not adaptive reuse, how new and old are juxtaposed. You're of course doing that with white adjacent and modern to masonry, but literally down to the detail of how the white and how the sides touch the adjacent buildings. I'm not asking a question, I'm just proposing that's something that should be thought about. If you go look at 304 South Gay Street, a Sanders Pace project from a long time ago. It's clad in metal. It's very modern. It doesn't look like it's in downtown, but there's rigor to that, and of the metal to simulate brick, that sort of thing. But really what I'm getting at is you look at the relief they've provided between the stone building and its facade, it's intentional to say, I'm not grafted on to this existing context. I'm a new thing. I'm respecting that. I think that's just a design rigor piece that could be, would help some of the goals of the project, to be different, to stand out, to say I'm different. The siding, I get like, yeah, I've used Oco Skin on things. Oco Skin's it is definitely the upper echelon of fiber cement. It's not fiber cement. It's not hardy. It's substantial. It's the exposed fasteners. It can be have longevity. I would just say why. Like, again, this is getting in the verge of just design discussion, which I know that we have guidelines, but it's also just, I appreciate your efforts when you come to us, Logan, so just having a design discussion is just, if I was to propose those ins and outs and you showed the example of like what the potential precedent imagery was, I would wonder if it's like an interpretation, or maybe you can speak to it. Is it an interpretation of massive and heavy and monumental and masonry that like reflects downtown with those big portions, but then why is the scale so massive, and is there a rigor to the patterning, that sort of thing? That's the kind of, when I say haphazard or unresolved, is I at the moment can't put my finger on it, but I've not been designing the project like you all have. And finally, you have done it in a lot of ways. I think one thing that would help sell your product is more drawings, like, and I know you have them, but in some capacity, but 16 with your base metal top. You do have long elevations with the context next to it, but and I see that you're regulating line connections between your adjacent properties, but I think almost showing like a transformation diagram of vacant site and how the piece is built up, referring to its context, I guess, to inform the mass and the scale of it. I think it could sell your argument more as to why, like that long elevation, just as to why you brought it up to the level that you did. And I know you have that line tracing it, but I mean really those two next to it. It's like, be informed by it, don't be hindered by it, but be informed by the context next to it.
Speaking towards it, just a couple of comments from a resident perspective. So I live right up the street from this, and I walk down Jackson every day. So coming down the Jackson Avenue ramp from Gay Street, you're going to see the side of the building that's being displayed right here. And I think one of the concerns that I have is that as you're coming from Gay Street down into the Old City, your view now is of a historic district that has all of these architectural elements of historic buildings. And so having something of this scale in the neighborhood as a resident is a little concerning, in the sense of it changes the feel of the neighborhood. Granted, with the stadium development, we're bound to have changes in the neighborhood. But my concern is that from a Gay Street angle coming down into the neighborhood, I mean, it really dramatically changes the feel of the neighborhood.
If you don't care, make a comment on that. We might be neighbors, actually, because I live right there as well. But I think to kind of contrast that, but also I'm glad you bring that up, because that view from walking down the Jackson Avenue ramp as you're walking this direction, currently, you're right, a lot of the buildings that you see in the distance are shorter. The very first building you see is take a shot every time I say this, but the JFG building with a 6-story white facade with windows in it, which will be scaled differently than what we have right now. So that view of JFG is the more ornate. The other side is the solid side that they added windows when they renovated it. But the other point to that is I do think that, that's why we wanted to include those future views of the buildings that are scheduled, are coming down the pipeline, because that view is going to change drastically, and I think that that scale is going to continue to grow. So I hope that I understand what you're saying, and I hope that this is similar enough to some of the other things you see to help create that transition.
Yeah, 5, 10 years, this building will be small.
Like Cumberland Avenue.
Joey, microphone.
It doesn't work. Is it working now?
Oh, yeah. If it's near your mouth, it does work, yes.
So with the staff recommendations, you comment on some of the things you're already going to change, like the roof line. Is there anything else you see that you struggle with, or they all look good to you?
There were a few things with the windows that I could get into a little bit more detail. So our intention with the windows is to do a metal structure window. We put in there that we wanted to do metal, and that fiberglass may be a backup option if it comes down to cost. But our intention is to do metal windows, aluminum. The sizing of the windows, one thing that we kind of looked at is just how different all of the windows are downtown. And if you just look at this view, you can see that no two windows are the same. The proportions change for every building. Some are more long width, some are taller. So there's really, like, we tried to capture some of those dimensions, have similar proportions in terms of the dimensions, and then have a window that does, like it's been mentioned earlier, speak more to our time in terms of the stylistic aspects. And so that's why we've gone with these horizontal panes that to compare to existing. If you look at the building on the corner of the 300 building on Gay Street, it has these triple hung windows, and so you have a similar look of 1, 2, 3. And then also in terms of operation, we're expecting operable windows that do an awning open, which is is the same type of window that you see at the JFG building, JFG and the Sturkey building as well. So that's one thing that was mentioned that we hadn't gotten into very much. So they are intentionally different in some way. We don't plan on dividing them up with smaller mutton bars, but I think that it keeps with the spirit of being its own element. And then I also, if it's okay, to Cameron's point, I was looking at the 325 building this morning, actually, and the two sides that you mentioned, and I think it's really neat the way those, even though one side has a building, the other side is vacant, both sides are the same, and like help create that look. And that is definitely something that, especially as we get the survey, a little bit more details now that everything's cleared out, we're going to be able to have a better idea of what those side walls are doing. And then in terms of that side elevation, I think, were you talking about how we've got some of the panels coming in and out? I think the 3D model doesn't show the grid that we're using, but the side elevation probably does. Our idea there is on the west side, we're not really able to, we weren't able to get an easement for windows, and it didn't really make sense since there's only 2 floors that would benefit from that, really 1.5. And so the idea there was to try to, in avoiding a blank wall, have some sort of variation to it. I think there's a little bit of a little bit more investigation that needs to go into what the exact sizing of these panels can be for that. We've been trying to get an answer from manufacturers, and it's been difficult. So the intention of the bringing in and out is to break up the massing of that wall, and then also we want to keep the grid lines aligned with other aspects.
to your point, you're right, it is somewhat unresolved. And we even looked at, changing patterns, creating a pattern with different colored panels and variation of in and out. It's just we want to avoid just that big blank white wall.
Yeah, I think that as you all work on it, just try to come to, I would say, try to come to something, like what you wrote in here, get to something better than say that you're doing it to create visual interest, because that's, no offense, it's just kind of a lame response. Like, just to make it look cool. I've heard people say, we wanted to make it funky. I don't really like that either.
We're going for spunky,
Yeah,
not funky.
but I mean, to have a precedent of all the claddings around you and say, well, here's a zoom in on that, and we took that and tweaked it very slightly to pay homage to it, but here's a modern interpretation of that materiality, the bond pattern, whatever. But one last thing, and someone else needs to talk. When I said something about haphazardness or maybe like unresolved, is really like things like the revolving door and the lights that are put there. It's kind of like a bag of tricks that are just being applied. So be careful with that, because that's what it reads like to me. Is it's just like, it's the visual interest moment of, I just need to break this up. It's not interesting, so I need to do something. So I think that it can be better.
I've got a couple questions and comments. I'll just throw them out there and maybe you can talk at the end. One would be, I'd love to see specifically, maybe in the 3D where the mechanical is going to go. I've seen you've noted that. I've been a stickler on this board about like screening of mechanical, but also, I just want to make sure it feels like enough space, and all of a sudden we got condensing units all over the place. So I trust you've thought about that, but I'm curious to see where that is in 3D. And then, secondly, I saw your floor plan, and I heard you say you're going to have retail, which is a requirement, I think, of the guidelines. And it doesn't appear, I think you're still in progress, but it doesn't appear that you have entrance to those off of Jackson. And so I think that would help with the retailness of it, is to have those there. But once again, I'll let you respond to that. And then, just two other quick comments, or one. I mean, I appreciate all the research you've done on the downtown included. I think that's really helpful. I think specifically we're talking about the warehouse district here, which, I mean, admittedly, I didn't go look completely, but I've done a project down there, and I don't see a lot of stone buildings. JFG is a concrete building, but there's a lot of masonry buildings. I respect what you've done with the windows. I'm not saying you have to use masonry. I don't think that's our way to dictate, but I would say that it's hard for me to stretch from the masonry to the concrete and then the interpretive stone and then interpretation of the stone. I respect the modernization of it because, that's an important part of the new development we're doing here, but, or you guys are doing. But to me, that's a harder connection, is to that materiality. So I don't know where the board's going to land, but, my feeling would be if it is become a fiber cement panel that, what you've shown is really, just as an architect, is very high end. I know the difference, what happens when it's hardy and Equitone over long-term durability. I think I'm responding to the masonry being a durable material that's representative of the neighborhood. So I would feel like it would be a totally different project if it was fiberglass windows and hardy siding, fiber siding. I don't think that's your intent, but also when it's built, it's harder for us to go back and say, well, shoot, we should have said that. So, I feel like some assurance of, and also I heard your intent about the windows not being flush, and I know you're working through all that. So I think, maybe, once again, I don't know where we're going to land on the voting on this project, but my feeling would be there would be some assurance that the windows are recessed, that the material, because I think I read in here it's Equitone or similar, and I think I would rather know if it's I say Equitone, or, the stuff you passed around, or the similar. I feel like even though we're not dictating the materials, the durability of it, I think, is sort of a part of this board's review. So those are my primary comments. I think I agree scale is close to me. It's close to some other buildings. I appreciated the drawing you did. knowing the future development, I think, you're respecting that you're obviously having to make some changes. It's not going to change drastically, but I get that. So I have less concern about that than some of the materiality. I first glance was thinking, oh man, the pedestrian, I mean, you're working out the sort of entry to the drive. I wish there was an alley entrance. There's not. You got to do the best you can. We can't hinder development due to that. I think respecting, it looks like you're recessing I like the recess on the lower level, by the way. I think that gives extra streetscape. It keeps some depth on the facade. And then recessing your entry to the garage, because if you have people pulling in and out and it's conflicting with pedestrians, I think you've taken that into account. I know you've got to rework some of that, but I would encourage you to keep those elements, from my perspective, in there, making the best out of what you feel like you sort of have to do given the conditions of the site. So.
And those were some of the city's comments too, as far as
okay.
last meeting. So that's, yeah, we're definitely taking that into account. Going back to your question about the entrance to
Brian, will you speak into the microphone?
Going back to your question about the entrance to the retail, that would be where the revolving door is. You enter into a entry lobby, and then that's kind of the control point. Whether at night the restaurant's closed, you're able to access the elevator to get up to the units.
Lindsay, would you care to go up one page?
The floor plan?
Yeah, so this is a somewhat of the main level. It doesn't show the interior walls, but the idea is, because the whole main level, we say retail, we really mean broadly, specifically it's intended to be a restaurant on this entire floor, but with the intention that it could also be split up into other retail spaces. But the idea, because we have a mix of uses and multiple occupants coming in, is that we'll have a foyer space with access down to the lower level, and then access into the retail space there. So that was kind of the rationale behind not having other entries on Jackson. And then also, would you care to go way up to the beginning where we've got some 3D views, and I can point out where the mechanical is intended to be. So let's go, well, actually, yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah,
so right there, that's that lower, the commercial kitchen section. We have a pretty good amount of square footage back there where we're going to put more than half of the mechanical. And then there's a corner of the top floor, or of the roof deck, that we are intending on also having a few floors worth of mechanical. And we're going to do individual units and not like a cooling tower system. So it will be multiple smaller ones rather than one big system.
I guess in response to that, the back is, it's facing the railroad track. The top, it sounds like, not knowing the details, you're going to have it fully screened. From what I could see, it's part of your design. So,
as much as they'll let us do.
4 foot high screen wall.
Oh, sounds like you have 3 foot tall mechanical units now. Yeah.
And was there also, in terms of material,
right.
I did want to clarify the reason we put or similar or comparable in there is because I didn't want to say this specific brand. This brand is a great example and definitely would be amazing to use, but there's a few brands that do this type. We're definitely not wanting to go with we're not at all, it's not on the table at all to go with something like a hardy type material. That's not in the consideration right now. And then I think or Nichiha or something. So the masonry is, or the concrete panel is really just something of that material, but the brand could change depending on availability and pricing.
But you're going with the concrete textured. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm go with the flow on this group in a lot of ways. I'm just trying to figure out, there's just a lot of it in the building. And I just feel like having a more firm, not necessarily a brand, but just a resolution on the once again, I'm not trying to dictate them. I'm not trying to dictate the materials. I'm just saying it's a large part of this building, and the color, the texture, the how it comes together, the variation on those sides. I mean, that's just my opinion, but I think the direction is okay. Based on what we're seeing. I like how you broke up the scale on the front and things like that, but that's just my thoughts. But
And I think that we, from the staff report, and I'll say broadly, I think with something of this scale and where we are in the phase, where by the time we're ready to get to start construction, there's going to be something else that we're going to be back here explaining and asking for permission on. And of course, I think that roof is going to be one of those things. We'll have to come back and show the new version of the roof. So I think that there will be opportunity as this is solidified to come back and show that for firm approval.
Yeah, maybe we could ask for approval based upon seeing the final material.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm saying as we create a motion. So,
I like that.
I think the windows are really important. It's hard for me. I might lack imagination, but it's hard for me to imagine fiberglass windows being equal to metal windows. So I know it's an expensive part of the project, but I just think it's essential to the
Honestly,
look.
we've taken fiberglass out of that mix. I mean, it will be aluminum, whether, it's, we used, next door was a Traco window, which was more historically accurate, but it's going to be similar to that, but I don't want to get into like aluminum storefront either.
Right. And I want to thank you, the applicant, for following the guidelines and making sure that there's something for the public there. So I think that's great that there's going to be a restaurant. It's important.
But to that end, these drawings are highly publicly consumed right now, and there's not a single scale figure in the street image. So you referenced some of the projects coming online in the future adjacent, and some of those renderings, you go to, like that middle one with brick and everything, like look at that, it's an activated street. And
Those
just make,
are our renderings, actually.
yeah, well, sell it the same way then, just because this is already online and other multiple platforms, and it looks void of life currently.
I have just a quick question, it's primarily for Lindsay. Is there anything in the guidelines about trees or anything? Just as a resident, and you have a beautiful building, but when you come out, I don't know if you're going to permit dogs in the building, but just something to think about. It's very popular in front of the Pembroke. There's some trees.
Yeah.
People-
One thing when it comes to the sidewalk, we've tried not to, the city will, there was the west side of Jackson underwent the redevelopment with the sidewalks.
Yeah.
That is planned at some point, or the streetscape, yeah, thank you. That's planned at some point on the east side. And so I would anticipate that they would have trees in their plan.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to, we know that that's going to happen in the next few years. And so we didn't want to plan on a tree going here and then a few months later or a year later, the city comes through and removes it and turns it.
What you see on the other side of Central?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, that is, again, I think that is the plan to go up there to the stadium.
Yeah.
As far as the streetscape.
And it's tough as a board member because we know a lot is coming, but we have to make our decisions based on today, the information that we have today. So we can, project only so far and.
And there are some design guidelines that have comments related to street trees. These are mostly related to the public realm. And so, downtown beautification in the rights of way and in public spaces. And so typically when the city does initiate those projects, they do also come through the design review board for at least a recommendation to council. So that's something that as you said, would see on the back end as well.
I have a quick question. So this current slide that's up, of those projected, future renderings, which of those actually fall within the Jackson Avenue warehouse district?
I can.
Definitely the two on the left. One's already there.
This one is existing.
That's existing. That's Stockyard.
I don't think Stockyard falls within the Jackson Avenue warehouse district.
That one, I believe. Let's just look.
Warehouse district's drawing kind of weird.
Well, and since you brought it up, one precedent is I'm personally glad that Big Don the Costumers building got torn down and now they have a 5-story building there. I think that's an appropriate scale for the area and an appropriate building. So I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too concerned with the tear down of this existing, really non-contributing building.
So to answer Jared's question, none of those. This is the boundary of the historic district in the green on the screen. There's Stockyard Lofts, and then the adjacent theoretical projects are here in the gray area. And just for Jared's context, as a newer board member, we haven't reviewed it. I mean, other than Stockyard Lofts, which has been approved. The Spring Hill Suites, I believe they presented a workshop, but the Design Review Board hasn't reviewed a final project on that or either of these. So just as a context.
Those trees.
And this would have been a great workshop first,
Yeah.
guys. So.
Was that middle rendering you said that was your rendering? Is that an actual proposed design? Are you just theorizing what it could be?
So,
Because you've got, this has got brick and rigor and repetition that's referencing the context. There's something about it that is more digestible.
it's hard to speak on that because I'm not really sure where they're at in that process now. But this was done in response to a very specific hotel brand, and so we were taking the design requirements of that hotel brand and trying to make them fit within the downtown context. I'm not sure. I think the owner of those properties is wanting to focus on the Spring Hill Suites first, and then see what other things they can do with the property across the street. But I think in that consideration, they would probably, since that was based off a very specific flag for a hotel, if they're not going with that, then it's likely that they'll want to go with more height on that side of the street. And I think the Spring Hill Suite building in this version is 5 stories, and I think I could be wrong, but I think they may have adjusted to be 6 stories now with their current plan. But it's gone through some various iterations since this rendering as well. So
We workshopped that project.
But not a formal review.
Few questions, I'll throw them out there and you can just hit them back as you want. Why such a strong departure from the building that was presented in the workshop to what we see now? I mean, honestly, that looks like you took the Tennessean Hotel and basically just set it on that side.
I think the easiest answer there is our workshop was for an addition over an existing building, and this is infill. So that's kind of the biggest difference there.
And as far as the material goes, the fiber cement is going to be a challenge, I think, with the insets and the detailing that's required on that. I don't know if you've budgeted that yet or not, but I would see that to be the first product of a VE exercise to go out, and then you're going to end up with a big white box. So if I could, I would point you to a building down in Chattanooga called the Kinley. It's a warehouse adapt type project like this. It has some of the same challenges that you do with the pedestrian and with the car park being inside. But it's a really sharp looking building, and it treats the ground plane really nice. And then as far as maybe an alternative, there's a product by Drive It. Don't freak out because I say Drive It, but it's called New Brick. I saw some samples of it today. Have you seen it, Brian?
Their brick?
No, it's the New Brick product, the panel. Well, it looks like masonry. It's a fraction of the cost. It meets the energy code. And what I like about it is when you put it up, it doesn't have the mortar in it. So you put the panels up, and then you come back with the mortar, and once you get above 15, 20 feet, it looks like brick. So when you start VEing your expensive products, keep that one in mind.
Rick, is that a brick colored product?
Yeah, Jim, it looks just like brick. Cameron, I saw it at your office.
I didn't approve it.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's real attractive. It's a masonry look, and like I say, it meets the energy code. You put the mortar in, it's something to think about. And look at that Kinley Building too, Logan. I think you'll like it. I'm okay with the scale. Scale doesn't bother me so much. My only fear is that if these other buildings continue to get big, we're going to have another Cumberland Avenue down here.
I just wanted to make one quick observation regarding the height of structures. The general rule of thumb in urban design is a comfortable height is whatever the face-to-face buildings are along the streetscape, so whatever that distance is, the building height of the same, so 1-to-1 ratio is considered ideal. 2-to-1 ratio is about the max you want to go to before it starts becoming uncomfortable for the pedestrian. West Jackson Avenue, or is it East Jackson? Jackson Avenue here, where this building is about 50 feet wide from building face to building face, so most comfortable would be 50 feet tall. A little bit more than that, you're probably fine. Other taller buildings that have been discussed are on wider streets. So you just got to think about where the street is, like where the building is in context and how it relates back to this particular project.
I like that. So are you saying that 2-to-1 is kind of the max where you'd want to go? So it'd be 100 feet would be the max, but somewhere in between, below?
Yeah, 50 feet would be considered just a rule of thumb of like, that's about most comfortable, like height-wise. And then 2-to-1 is probably about the max you want to go to.
Okay.
So this consideration, so the original zoning code for Knoxville, downtown Knoxville, maximum height was 2 times the width of the right-of-way. And then if you wanted to go over that, you had to go back at a 45-degree angle in height. So that was the 1928 zoning code.
Okay. So does anybody else have any comments? So I think what you guys are really trying to understand is, are we okay with the scale and with the general direction and the general of everything? And it sounds like you're going to have to come back to us anyway with the roof and a couple other elements like that. Yes. Yeah, and like I think it's great you guys are putting the parking behind the building, right? And the way you're handling that, I do think you're gonna have a hard time getting the width you need. I think, don't you need 20 feet at least?
We had a workshop with them last week, and we worked through those details with city engineering, and they're comfortable with those numbers.
Okay, so from my perspective, as long as there's not some wild variation from what you're showing us, that's up to the city, not to us. We talked about the roof line, the material samples. If you make, significant modifications to the samples you showed us, I think it would be good for us to see that again. And of course, number 5, I don't know about the windows. Does anybody have any strong feelings about them having to show us the details on the windows? So if they're using an aluminum system, it's going to be pretty good.
For me, I think the details are how the windows fit in the facade too, how they're recessed, like those types of details are pretty important.
Like the depth?
Yeah, I mean, this is more than just like the window system itself, but how does it actually fit within the facade?
Especially for the non-architects on the board who visuals help.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to let you guys understand where we stand and to let you move forward, and then just bring back the details to us if we're all okay with the scale, which it sounds like generally we are. Am I a little straw poll, is that correct?
I'm just afraid that number 2 is going to drastically change the project. Like the revised roof line is a big deal because I know when that gets revised, it's going to revise the level below it that's set back. So I'm afraid that us saying we're okay with the general massing, it's going to be a pretty big departure with number 2 being vetted, in my opinion.
And just to
only
address
change-
that, I would say that's why these are the elements that I noted very specifically come back to the board for further review, because I think you're right that the revised roof line is something that will change the overall
But
impression
it's like
of
the roof
building.
line is going to be a discussion of the whole building again, the whole facade, is what I mean. Number two will be the general massing discussion again, I think, with the.
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
I think they'll have to come back.
yeah.
The roof line, as I understand it, Cameron, is that it's to taking that flying swoopy thing off to where that canopy on the top is just straight all the way across and then aligns with the piece at the end
We just,
and wouldn't impact the building as a whole.
that's correct. It's the fact that we're going above 85 feet. There's a local zoning code element that we want to be back under that 85 feet, where right now the majority of the roof is at, the top of it is at 85 feet. And so basically it's just that step up portion. We'll bring it back down to flat.
It'll keep you out of the high-rise
Yeah.
classification?
We're above the height restriction just in that section of the roof. The other part that we've got to work with the city is coverage. As far as it being defined as another floor level instead of just a roof deck with a canopy. So that's something that we're going to have to go back to the drawing board on that.
But I think that from the views that we've seen, the only change would be, visually would be that raised portion is going to be flat across. And if there are any other drastic changes, I think that would certainly trigger a totally new visit here. That's not, a review of these points, but hey, we had to undergo a major change. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind.
So,
Well, I was trying
Almost.
to fit something together to let you guys keep moving and let you understand where we stand as a board.
yeah, that's what, I have a question regarding that. So what is our task today? Are we approving something, or are we just making a recommendation for them to come back to address these 5 items?
Does the word
This
pose
is more like a
That's why I'm
workshop.
trying to, I don't know. Yeah, it's
So
almost
I
like,
don't get that we're approving anything. We're just saying, yeah, okay, see you after you've revised everything. I mean, are we really voting on anything?
I'm not sure
So
if we
then
are
your
or not.
motion would be to postpone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
I
looks
mean,
like
it could be a
even-
postpone, but I want to make sure you guys understand. I want to make sure that the board's okay with the scale and with the general concept, so that they know they're not just spinning their wheels for the next 30 days, because I know how much that time means.
I have a question. So, as a new board member and not a non-architect, can you talk about what you mean by scale?
It's how big the building is in relation to the buildings around it and to the pedestrian experience.
So, I guess my concern would be that, I mean, in this district, as noted, I think 2 to 5 stories. So this exceeds what, is by, 1 story of what's historic for the district.
I think
That's one concern that I have.
And that's what, I guess, in my mind, when the roof line is revisited, I would, like when I made that comment earlier that it's base, middle, top, it has a really big head on it, and I wonder if there's going to be an iteration of how much can you reduce that roof line, not by just making it flat, but the discussion of similar to Perry's about does that get stepped back, like how, and to your comment, how visually unobtrusive and go away can you make that top to where I'm really reading that instead of that and that. I think that's a pretty powerful, massing as it stands diagrammatically. It's just that extra layer at the top is, I think that's the scale part that I think is a bit tall.
Logan,
Yes.
go ahead, and
Yeah.
then I'll ask you a question.
What we would prefer to get out of today would be a condition-based approval so that, so that we can move forward with the work that we're currently doing, because we're fully on this right now. And but I think the condition would be maybe that we come back for those 4 items. And to Cameron's point, the roof, I think that there maybe are potentially other big changes. And so I think that if we came back with a roof design that didn't didn't fit with the guidelines, then I think that would be could be a separate denial with the project. So we would prefer a more condition-based approval rather than a postponement or something, just so we can comfortably put in our hundreds of man hours between now and then.
Lindsay, can you go back to the staff recommendations?
Yeah.
What about the statement on the roof here of them having to come back would keep us from approving the other things? Would something need to be added to that recommendation?
To number 2,
They have to come back for it according to this recommendation.
If we,
I just think I think they're coming back for more than that. That's why it's like this is almost a pseudo workshop than a. I just think that in my brain, but I'm not the designer on it. I just feel like that's going to impact more than just the roof line. But that's my own feeling. If the board thinks otherwise, then it's just what it says. It's just the roof line changing.
Logan, is that rooftop space, is that a revenue generating space?
No.
Okay.
It's a rooftop for the top floor condos, so it's private access.
Private residence rooftop.
Okay, but to Jared's earlier point, if it's 6 stories and we approve it, they need every story to make the performa work. And if we tell them to take story off, you can kill the project.
Well, one of the things, though, to address Jared's question there is that they've held the main mass of the building to the 3 to 5, and their 6th floor is different and set back. So I think that's where they've tried to address the concern of it getting out of the recommended scale in the area. Well, I'm looking at the staff recommendation. We would frequently do things like a motion to approve based on staff recommendation, but it looks like the staff recommendation is that you come back. So would this be a motion to postpone based on staff recommendation pending review of the items identified?
So, yes, this was intentionally open because the intent was to guide the discussion and approval of the height and scale. So the board has the capacity, A, to postpone, so the applicant will address all of those items, bring back the proposal in that way so that they can see how it sort of fits that cohesive perspective like Cameron was referencing, or the board has the capacity to approve the project with the condition that those 5 elements return to the board.
Where Josh was going was if we do postpone it, we need to give them enough information that they can go back and continue to move forward, not just put pencils down. Right, Josh?
well, they've had an hour
Yes.
and 18 minutes of discussion, so I think that's enough notes to go from. But I do think that given the choices that Lindsay just outlined, there's too much unresolved to approve anything because we don't really have anything to approve because lots of things could change.
Well, I thought Logan's point was appropriate that if we say, okay, we approve the scale and general concept, but you got to come back to us and talk to us about the roof, about the window details, and whatever else we want to attach to that. And then they come back with something weird, we can be like, no, you messed it up. You're going to have to go back to the drawing boards again.
I think the argument is, what is that approval worth if we're reviewing it again?
I could calculate our
You guys have heard
hours.
the recommendations, right? I don't think you're gonna come back and screw it up.
Well,
You guys have heard us, you
let-
understand.
Let me
Let
just kind of say
them work
where,
on it, bring it back.
let me just say where we are in the process. We're right in the middle of design development. So to Josh's point, that what we would like to, if nothing else, take away from today, that there isn't any very strong objection to the overall size, scale, and massing of this building, which doesn't sound like what I'm hearing. There are some design tweaks that we need to do and details that we need to do and come back to you. But, you know, if we could walk away from here today knowing that there's nothing major that needs to be changed or redesigned, then, you know, we're good with that.
One other question, a very important one. What percentage completion is this DD set right now?
We're at about 50%.
And have you had it priced by contractor?
That's where we're heading.
Okay.
We're going to have a design development, we're putting together a design development pricing package.
So that'll have more impact on the project than anything we say. Right. End of the day.
Yeah.
So
I
get it
agree.
priced and then put your escalations and contingencies and
And then we go to drive it.
keep fingers crossed. New brick.
New brick.
So you basically want to make sure that we're not going to come back when you come back and say, no, it really needs to be 2 stories after all.
Yes.
I know that's not what we're saying, that it needs to be 2 stories.
So what's the motion to keep it going, but make them come back? Right.
I think that's
my
the,
question.
Lindsay gave us that option, which is to approve based on staff comments. And I'm just spitballing a motion here. This is not my official motion, but if we said motion to approve based on staff comments, but instead of saying revised roof line on the rooftop deck, just say revised proportions, or use a different word rather than just the rooftop deck, so that we have the freedom to talk about the overall proportions of the building.
Maybe
I
we
think you
add
can just
that
say
as well.
revised roof line. Just say revised roof line. They have, whatever they do, we have to approve it. You know, we don't have to limit it.
I think their list, the staff list, covers pretty much the things we keep landing on.
And it gives you some assurance that we're not going to completely
Redesign.
go 180 on you in 3 months or whenever it is.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to pass per staff recommendations.
Approve per staff recommendations? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
We said pass. Okay.
And is that, Joey, is that with the change to number 2, just saying
Revised number
revised
2,
roof
yeah.
line?
Yes, what was y'all said? Roof.
So you're,
Okay, so you want to approve per staff recommendation so the staff can review this, or that they have to come back to us?
Back to us.
Yes. I just want to make sure that's in the motion. Yeah.
So we're not giving them a COA today? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay.
So, but are you revising number 2 on the revised roof line?
I think number 2 needs to stay as is.
Stay as is?
Stays as
Okay.
is.
Okay, just wanted that clarification then.
I think number 3, and I'll put it in legal jargon, but I think number 3 should say in detailing of it, since that was brought up, is like how it actually is, like as you guys develop the design, like what's actually, be a little cross-section and detail of what's happening and give some language and understanding to that. So I need to say that with actual legal
Those
language.
channel forms in those panels could really get out of hand.
So like 3 and 4, or just 3 for that?
I think 3 and 4. The detailing language in 4 could be brought into 3 as well.
Okay, so Cameron, do you want to attach that to Joey's motion?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Joey, will you accept that attachment to the motion? Can you speak clearly into the mic?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, if we could, pause just 1 second. We're trying, our scribe is
Yes,
trying
of course.
to get everything squared away here. So the motion, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, thank you, we could just take it in parts. Commissioner Natura moved to approve per staff recommendation. We're leaving number 2 as it is at this point. We're now you're adding to, do we have a second? No, I guess we could just go ahead and so Cameron, changing number 3 and 4 to include more detail?
Number 3, the motion would be number 3 includes the requirement for material, detail, depth, et cetera, that 4 explains, but include that in number 3's requirements.
And in 4, you had mentioned number 4 as well?
4 is what it is. I was using 4 as the example because
got
4
it.
mentions the specs, sections, depth, detail. That's what I was hoping to see on number 3 as well, for the materials.
Not pretty right now.
And then number 4 on staff recommendation should be turned to number 5. You have 2 4s. The last 4 should be 5. Okay, could you please read the motion in full?
In full? Okay, hang on 1 second. Yes, motion was made by Commissioner Natour, we don't have a second yet, to approve per staff certificate 4B 23 DT per staff recommendation with Cameron amending condition number 3 to include the requirements, the details, including material specs and dissection with depth of detail to be compatible with the historic district for item number 3.
Does the coming back before the board need to be a part of the motion?
Yes, that's listed in there. That is staff recommends the
Part of staff
additional
rec.
details return to the board for further review.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Joey and a second by Suzanne. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all. That's perfect for, and very helpful. So looking forward to coming back with those, responding to that feedback. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break.
I need to leave. Is that something I need to formally do? Because John just left.
I know. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
No,
motion.
you don't, Cameron, you don't need to.
Okay. I have to get.
Okay, I don't know. We got enough.
That's what I just said. Did you not hear me? That's what I said. I make a motion to approve the next 2.
Next one, we've got, which one are we doing
So
this?
we're on infill. We just, in John's motion, moved that one to the top. So we'll still
Okay.
just hop through this infill and it.
The
and
0
Logan-
Chickamauga
Logan can
Avenue.
Come back in here. Yep.
Okay. 4C23IH.
Yes. So this is a new primary residence. It's fronting Chickamauga Avenue. This is, as Suzanne pointed out, this is a design we've seen before on Atlantic Avenue, several blocks away. This is a 1.5-story cross gable roof residence. It's 28 feet by 62 feet long. It has a smaller front gable roof massing projecting from the left half of the facade. It's adjacent to a recessed corner porch on the right. The house is proposed to be set 21 feet from the front property line, and the parking is accessed from the alley on the rear. The house will be clad in a fiber cement lap siding. The facade features that 8-foot deep recessed corner porch, and there's a centrally located door flanked by 2 bays of paired 1/1 double hung windows. I'll run through some of the comments real briefly. The house is proposed to be set 21 feet from the front property line. This block does have a sort of irregular front yard pattern. However, the average front setback of the block is 28 feet. The adjacent houses are significantly further from the front property line, so the front setback should move towards the rear of the property to align with the 2 surrounding houses. The house is proportional to the dimensions of the lot, and the side yard setbacks are consistent with the block. The parking meets the infill housing guidelines, though the final site plan may require modifications to meet city engineering standards. The site plan does include an 8 feet deep front porch. It's recessed into that primary elevation. The porch is compatible with the design of the house and the surrounding block. 8x8 posts may be more compatible with the facade, proportional to the facade, and final drawings may require a guardrail around the porch. Overall, the design has a significant amount of windows on the facade. The board may choose to discuss these small fixed windows that are closest to the street on the right side elevation. So the staff recommendation is to approve 4C23IH, subject to the conditions that the that the front setback is revised to align with adjacent houses, the porch columns are increased to 8x8s, the final site plan meets city engineering standards, and then the final site plan includes the native or naturalized shade trees in the front and rear yards.
Thank you for that. And since the applicant is not here, are there any comments from the board?
Is there anything that would limit them from aligning with the adjacent houses?
No.
The windows not being in line are unique, but it's consistent.
You know, the bottoms of the little ones align with the tops of the big ones.
Is that what it is?
And so it brings some order to it. That
Yeah.
Isn't usually there.
Did Cameron tell you to say that?
Yes.
Are you his proxy?
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve based on
Second.
staff recommendations.
Okay, so the motion to approve is per staff recommendations, and we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. All right, so we have
How efficient we actually
400 West Magnolia Avenue, 4 Alpha 23 Delta Tango. Let me know, Lindsay.
This is an exterior rehab project. It's focusing on the rear elevation of the existing building. So what you're seeing here, this is fronting Gay Street. You can see that on the site plan here. That's the side elevation with another entry. And then the work we're looking at is on that rear elevation. So the applicant is proposing to remove 1 double hung window and installing a full light door with a transom in the same location. It'll access an entrance landing with a new guardrail and a concrete ramp with a steel handrail. It also includes the installation of outdoor seating and planters in the private courtyard behind the building. So this building is not listed on the National Register. The Historic Resources section does not apply. The proposal does meet the design guidelines as it increases pedestrian level transparency. This is a pretty widely viewed area of the building. It provides a secondary access to the residential units, and it'll replace a window with a door of a similar size and design. The finish and material will match the existing. The work is concentrated on the rear elevation. It's not as visible from the primary streets. However, a right-of-way agreement with the city of Knoxville may be required for that landing and rear access, which are currently proposed within right-of-way. So the staff recommendation is to approve 4A23DT, subject to the condition that the applicant meets all applicable right-of-way requirements with the city of Knoxville.
Thank you for that. Logan, would you like to speak again?
love to. Unless y'all want to have a similar discussion to last time I was up here a few minutes ago, I think that the packet, shows everything we're doing, and I agree with Lindsay's recommendation, so happy to answer any questions.
I will say that it looks much better than that picture right now.
It does. It does.
And it's a back door. I would move to approve based on staff's recommendation.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion anymore? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks. Approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
We can just adjourn. We don't have to motion. All right, class is over, guys. Thank you.